UFC London is almost here. I'm going to give you my final picks. We'll talk about some prop opportunities. We're going to build some lineups, and I have a new segment starting this week, so make sure you watch until the end. You can call me Kunith. Let's make some money this week. If you haven't already, go back and watch the video from earlier in the week. I'm going to have it linked right in the top of the description. That's where we go over the entire slate. We have a banger of a card. We're back in the UK, so we need to get in that London state of mind. You need to play some Central C. You need to go buy a bubble coat. You need to eat some beans on toast. And you need to put your money in the right places, the right value places. But before we get into the value plays, we have to look at the change that came to the card throughout the week. God save the Queen. Mason Jones is going to be fighting this week against Ludovit Klein. I think that Mason Jones bullies Ludovit Klein this week. I think that he's able to get takedowns. I think he has Klein on the back foot. I think he does very well. I could also see him finding his way to Klein's back, getting a submission, maybe a rear naked choke at some point. I don't know if I like that more than a decision prop in this spot, but I do think that Mason Jones gets the job done. And it's largely because I'm not all that high on Ludovit Klein. He was actually the first ever fighter that we broke down on this channel way back when. And that was against Mike Trizano, where we all thought he was going to blow the doors off Mike Trizano when we found out he's not all that. The step up in competition from where he was fighting before versus the UFC is very, very apparent when you watch Ludovit Klein fight. Even in his last fight, he's fighting Devontae Smith. Devontae Smith gassed hard. He wasn't able to finish him. He spent a lot of time just clinching him up against the fence. I was not impressed. Now, early on, he is sharp. He has that nice high kick, but I think that Mason Jones is going to be able to eat everything coming back his way. This guy's tougher than a $2 steak. And when you look at the way that he ragged David Onama, yes, it was on short notice for Onama. Yes, it was Onama's debut, but David Onama is not bad, and the way that he made him look, it's pretty impressive. You see the 37-point performance against Alan Patrick, but in that fight, he looked like he was on his way to finish it in the second round, which would have gave him another 70 points. He would have looked at a score of north of 107. So he definitely was going to pay off his salary at 9,500. Here at 9,200, I'm not so sure that he does, but I am so sure that he wins. Give me Mason Jones this week and give me him by decision. And now we look at the value plays. You're going to need some of these fighters in your lineup to be able to afford the guys up top, to be able to afford the Paddy Pimblets, the Muhammad Mokaevs. And I think the best value play sits right up at 7,900 in Curtis Blaydes. Do I think he's a stone cold lock? No. I think Tom Aspinall is incredible, and I think that if you are running multiple lineups, let's say you play 20 max, you might as well have 10 Curtis Blaydes, 10 Tom Aspinall. This fight is very close. And I don't think it's going to look very close on Saturday. I think one of these guys is going to dominate and score a ton of points, and whoever wins for sure shows up in the optimal lineup. This is not a week where you can fade the main event. And I say that because if you look at Tom Aspinall, the likelihood of him finding a submission or finding a knockout inside the first or second round, very, very high. And then with Curtis Blaydes, he has 5 rounds to work, rinse and repeat takedowns, elite cardio for the division. The scoring ceiling that he has might be the highest in the UFC. And what I like about Curtis Blaydes is you know what you're going to get. You know you're going to get that takedown heavy approach. And you know with those takedowns is going to come some heavy ground and pound with those elbows that he likes to throw, and he could do it for the whole 25 minutes. On the other side, you have Tom Aspinall, who's never seen a third round. On top of that, if you look at Tom Aspinall's fight against Andrei Arlovski, he started to get tired after the first round, and they were only striking. And competition-wise, the level of competition that both of these men have faced, it's not even comparable. If you look at Tom Aspinall's 5 fights in the UFC, he has Jake Collier, who has no business being in the heavyweight division. The way that fight ended was the way we expected it to end. Alain Badeau, who we know might be the worst heavyweight the UFC has ever had. Andrei Arlovski, who was at the tail end of his career, and he was submitted by a rear naked choke with no hooks in. Just poor performance from Arlovski. He beat Sergey Spivak, who's a decent prospect in the division, but he's also somebody who was knocked out by Walt Harris in under a minute, and he lost to Marcin Tybura. That's not exactly elite competition. And again, Tom Aspinall looked great against Alexander Volkov, but Alexander Volkov does struggle to defend takedowns when they're well executed. Evidence of that is right here when Curtis Blaydes took him down 14 times with over 4 rounds of control time. So this is a big step up for Aspinall. He could very well gas out, and I think that Curtis Blaydes dominates if he's able to find 1 or 2 takedowns in the first 2.5 rounds of this fight. With 5 rounds to work, I don't think he's going to get Tom Aspinall out of there all that easily, so I do think that he probably wins this fight by late ground and pound or by decision, scoring north of 120 DraftKings points if he does get the W. So obviously great value here. Again, it's impossible to call him a lock. This fight is very close. And when we build lineups later in the video, we're going to build some with Curtis Blaydes. We'll also build some with Tom Aspinall just so we can get a look on both sides. But when it comes to single entry, when it comes to just picking one, in, not playing the fence like some of these other channels do. I want Curtis Blaydes. Our next value play is at 7,800. We have Victoria Leonardo. She's fighting Mandy Bohm this week. Like we talked about in the video earlier in the week, I do think that Victoria Leonardo is a strong play. And the reason why I say that is because Bohm struggles with physicality, and I think that we have an underrated grappler here in Victoria Leonardo. Leonardo has only lost to elite competition. Mandy Bohm might not even be UFC caliber. I know that this is going to be in Europe and they're hoping that Mandy Bohm wins, but I don't think that Leonardo is going to go out all that easily. I think that she wins this fight. I think she gets takedowns. I think she starts to dominate the longer that this fight goes as well. And one thing to consider is that she's going to be one of the lowest owned fighters on the entire slate, so something to look out for when you're building your lineups. And our next value play is a man here that needs no introduction. If you've been watching for a while, you know how I feel about Paul Craig. If you watched a video from earlier in the week, you damn well know how I feel about Paul Craig. Paul Craig is an elite grappler at 205 pounds. He's beaten the much better competition, and I think that if this fight does get to the mat at any point, Paul Craig's going to find a submission. You do worry about his chin, and I don't really worry about his chin at range. I worry about it when they're in the clinch. Paul Craig really likes to pull guard, and to do that, he has to get into the clinch first. Volkan Oezdemir throws those punches in close very, very hard. But we've also seen in the past, like most recently in his fight against Nikita Krylov, Paul Craig is willing to eat shots to be able to get in the position that he needs to finish the fight. Volkan Oezdemir trains with some of the best grapplers in the world, but you have to understand that Paul Craig's grappling is something that's very difficult, if not impossible, to train for, because that means you have to find somebody who's not only his size, but somebody who's a wizard on the mat as well, and could also do damage with his fists and elbows if he needs to. And the thing about Paul Craig too is that the danger that he presents never goes away until the fight's fully over. We have seen Paul Craig win fights with literally 1 second left on the clock in the third round. And when you consider that for a second, and you also consider that Volkan Oezdemir, he's not a dumb guy. He knows I don't want to grapple with this dude. Here's where things get a little bit tricky. Paul Craig could very well find a submission in the third round. I would not be surprised if we saw Volkan Oezdemir getting choked like Cat Williams late in the second or late in the third round. Okay. And if that's the case, then Paul Craig might not score that many. You see here against Ankalaev where he got that submission with no time left, or when he did the same thing against Kennedy and Zejiku. He scored south of 70 points and finished the fight. If he can't get takedowns against Volkan, but he's able to submit him in the third, he's not going to score that many points, and he's going to be the highest owned dog of the slate. I can promise you that. So there's solid value here on Paul Craig because there aren't many underdogs here that I like this week, and if he wins, you probably need him in your lineup if the favorites dominate, but you have to beware because he's going to be very highly owned this week, and you don't want him to burn you. And my last value play sits down at 7,200, not a guy I've changed my mind on throughout the week. I'm going to stay here. I'll die on this Canadian hill. We have Kyle Nelson. He's going to be fighting Jai Herbert this week. Now, I can tell you now, in my single entry, if I sit there and have a choice between Paul Craig and Kyle Nelson, I'm going to feel worse about it, but I'm going to go with Kyle Nelson. And the reason why I say that is because Jai Herbert is chinny. He was knocked out badly 4 months ago. And if Kyle Nelson wins, it's going to be inside the distance. And at this price, it really doesn't matter if it's in the third round. You're going to need him in your lineup. Kyle Nelson's been out of competition for 2 years, and honestly, I don't mind that. He's still only 31 years old, and now he's moving up a weight class from featherweight to lightweight, and I think that's a good move. And the reason why I say that is because he wasn't a small featherweight by any means. This guy is actually bigger than Justin Gaethje. So people are making a lot of him moving up a weight class and the fact that Jai Herbert's big for the division, but this guy's going to be big for the division as well. He's also going to be at a 6-inch reach disadvantage, but Jai Herbert has a big reach advantage over everybody. He had an even bigger reach advantage over Ilia Topuria. He had a big reach advantage over Renato Moicano. He had a big reach advantage over Francisco Trinaldo. Kyle Nelson throws hard. He's probably going to look to get takedowns in this spot. Jai Herbert can get bullied. And like we talked about in the video earlier in the week, Jai Herbert has just lapses in judgment all the time in the octagon. After that first round, he is not the same guy, and it's not because his cardio falls off a cliff, but he just does mentally. He starts to lose focus. He starts to forget about things. He starts to forget to tuck his chin, things like that. And against Kyle Nelson, he might get caught. Now, if you really think that Kyle Nelson's terrible, and I wouldn't blame you for thinking that, then it would make sense to go the other way, because I don't see this fight going the distance at all, but I think that Kyle Nelson at 7,200 is going to make a lot of things possible in your lineup, and the finishing upside is there. Well, now we can figure out what to do with these value plays by building some lineups, but before we do, make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel, comment something for the algorithm. You know how the algorithm works. And if you're not sure what to put in the comments, but you want to show support, I really like when you guys disagree with the picks and tell me what you guys think. It starts a healthy discussion in the comment section where some of us can take these picks and say, you know what, I like this analysis, this is what I'm going to go with. Now, if you're like 75% of people on MMA Twitter and somebody disagrees with what you say and you get all upset, don't waste your time. We don't want you here. Go on. But if you're somebody who has a stance that's different from what we talk about in the video or different from what you see in the comments and you want to talk about it, be respectful, I think that's cool. I also respect the hell out of those of you who say one thing's going to happen and when it doesn't, you come back to the comment section and say, oh, I was wrong. But now we can get into building some lineups. I always like to start with the cash game lineup. Now this week it's a little bit different than most weeks. I don't think I'm going to recommend stacking the main event this week, and the reason why I say that is because Curtis Blaydes could get knocked out in the first minute and a half. Aspinall can end up scoring 23 points and get finished in the 4th round. I don't see a situation where these guys go to war. I don't think that's going to happen. I think it's going to be one-way traffic either way. So I think that you can actually get away with fading the main event in cash this week, and I'll show you how we can do that. First, you're going to want to come down and you're going to want to grab somebody cheap. You're going to want to punt one of these spots. I would either pick somebody like Ludovit Klein, who I think has a chance of going the distance, or somebody like Kyle Nelson, who I think is going to win. Now, you're probably going to need somebody else who's cheap to make this work, so if you wanted to come up to Victoria Leonardo, I think that makes a lot of sense as well. Now you've got $87.50 left over per fighter. Now you have to make some hard decisions. As you're looking at the JSPs, the Nikita Krylovs, you're probably looking at Nicolas Dalby, and then you can come up here to Paddy Pimblett. You've spent all the salary, but in cash you're different enough because you don't have the main event. You have a chance to get 6 winners here, and I think this makes more sense than stacking the main event this week. Now, if you wanted to go super punt play and you take out Victoria Leonardo, you come down here to somebody like Ludovit Klein, you have some money left over if you want to do other things with your lineup. Like, for example, if you wanted to take out Nicolas Dalby and you wanted to grab somebody like Mokaev, I think that makes a lot of sense. Now, overall, your matchups aren't as good with this, but Mokaev's score versus what Nicolas Dalby scores probably outweighs what you would have got from Leonardo versus Ludovit Klein. If you want, you can always send me your cash game lineup or any lineup for that matter on Twitter. I'll tell you what I think, what changes you should make, if you should keep it the way that you do. Just make sure when you tell me what kind of contest you're in so I know what I'm looking at. Well, this is where I want to introduce the new segment. We're going to talk about over-owned and under-owned. So I'm going to give you a couple of fighters that I think are going to go way over-owned and a couple that are going to be way under-owned and why. So when we talk about fighters that are over-owned, I think the first person on that list is going to be Paddy Pimblett. I think that Paddy Pimblett is better everywhere. I think that he might even be able to knock Jordan Levitt out this week. I also think that there's a decent chance that this fight gets out of the first round, and that's going to reduce the ceiling for Paddy Pimblett, and he's probably going to come in at 60% ownership. He's also 8,900, so just buyer beware with Paddy Pimblett this week. I like him to get it done this week, but at the same time, at 8,900, this is a lot to spend for somebody who could very well end up winning this fight in the second round, or just winning a decision in pretty dominant fashion, but keeping it on the feet primarily. Because realistically, on the feet, there's no danger at all. The only danger that's presented in this fight is if he allows Jordan Levitt to get on top of him, or if he allows Jordan Levitt to start to get comfortable on the ground. But if he keeps this fight standing, I think that Paddy Pimblett is in no danger whatsoever. Another guy that's going to go way over-owned this week, in my opinion, is going to be Alexander Gustafsson. The Mauler has a lot of clout in this game. Everybody knows who Alexander Gustafsson is. People are going to see Alexander Gustafsson at 7,600 and think, well, I have to get there. But the reality is Alexander Gustafsson doesn't put people out like that. He has a 5th round knockout over Glover Teixeira. He has a 2nd round knockout over poster boy Manua, who did not pan out in the UFC at all. And then if you want to find a knockout before that, you have to go back literally 11 years. So no, I'm not convinced that he's going to knock Nikita Krylov out this week, and I'm not convinced that he's going to score that many points in a decision win either. Nor do I actually think that he's going to win. I think Nikita Krylov is going to win rounds based on his grappling, and Alexander Gustafsson, he accepts bottom position more than you'd like. Oops, let me put him back in there. Another guy that I think is going to go over-owned, unfortunately, is my guy Paul Craig. If Volkan Oezdemir fights a smart game plan, doesn't engage, and just stays on the outside, tries to land big punches but doesn't get too close, this could really drag the fight out. Even if Volkan Oezdemir is able to do that, have bigger moments on the feet, steal rounds, and not get taken to the ground, he could win a decision and score 75 points himself. I still think Paul Craig wins. Love me some Paul Craig, my favorite fighter to have never won a title. Which, by the way, if he wins this fight, how can you not say that he doesn't get the next title shot? With the people that he's beaten, especially where they stand in the division right now, if he beats Volkan Oezdemir, title shot. But I think that he goes over-owned this week. I think he's somebody that you would have a lot of success avoiding this week. Now, for the fighters that I think are going to go under-owned this week, I think you would be surprised with a couple of these. Now, like we talked about last week on the Final Picks video, when you're looking at ownership, the people below 8,000, they're naturally going to pull higher ownership than some of these more expensive guys. Like, for example, Dwight Grant. Dwight Grant last week pulled about 6% ownership. If Dwight Grant was able to knock out Dustin Stoltzfus, he would have broken the slate. So when you talk about leverage and finding fighters at really low ownership, a lot of people's minds default to somebody that's super cheap down here. A lot of people think, oh, if I could get the Hanna Goldy play this week, if she wins, I'm in a really good spot. That's not how this works. Yeah, not many people are going to want to come down here and play Charles Johnson. You know who else people aren't going to be playing? The other side of that fight with Mokaev at 9,500. Mokaev could just get a bunch of takedowns in this fight and score over 100 points. He could also get a takedown, find a submission in the first round, score over 100 points that way, and he's coming in at probably south of 20% ownership because of his high price. Another fighter that's going to go under-owned this week is right up here at 9,300 in Molly McCann. We talked specifically about this in the video earlier in the week. Molly McCann's floor is about 70-75 points. That is worst case scenario for her. In her UFC wins, she's averaging over 97.5 DraftKings points. Hanna Goldy gets hit a ton. Molly McCann throws a ton of strikes herself. She could get takedowns in this spot. She could push her up against the fence and work some boxing in the clinch. Like even in her last fight against Luana Carolina, she gets the knockdown and she gets the third round finish. Take both of those things away, you would take away essentially 25 points from her score. That was at the beginning of the third round when that happened. It was less than 2 minutes in. So if she continued to push a heavy pace, maybe got another takedown in that spot, she would have made up those other 15 points and probably scored right around this number in a decision win. Women's MMA, high price tag. People are going to want to get to Patty. They're going to want to be able to get to somebody like Mokaev over Molly McCann. I'm telling you now, she's going to come in below 20% ownership. If you fade her, it's probably a mistake. And then Marc Diakiese, right? And again, these guys are going to be expensive fighters. They're going to be right at the top of the slate. You're not going to find a low ownership low on the slate. Marc Diakiese could rinse and repeat takedowns this week, put together a similar performance than he did last time. I don't know if he'll get quite 11 takedowns, but I do think that he's going to be able to get this fight to the ground, and I actually think that he finds a submission at some point, but I think he scores over 100 DraftKings points. This is another guy who's probably going to come in below 25% ownership. And then the lowest owned fighter on the slate is obviously going to be Mandy Bohm. I wouldn't recommend playing her. I'm not all that high on Mandy Bohm, but if you're somebody who's trying to play the leverage game, I don't think that it would be a bad idea to have some exposure to Mandy Bohm, especially if you have several lineups. But we blow this up for your GPPs, your single entries, your 3 max, your 20 max. How do we win the money this week? Now in your tournaments, I think that it makes a lot of sense for you to grab one side of the main event. So let's say we come here to Curtis Blaydes. Let's say we also want another underdog. We go with somebody like Kyle Nelson, for example. Well, now you've got 87.25 left over per fighter. What can we make happen? You could pick Jonathan Pearce, who I think will get a ton of takedowns if this fight goes beyond round 1. You might have to come back down here and grab somebody else who's cheap to make the salary work. Let's say you go with somebody like Victoria Leonardo. Well, now you've got 9,200 left over. You could grab somebody like Marc Diakiese. You can grab somebody like Molly McCann. You're looking at low ownership and upside, low ownership upside, grappling advantage, physicality advantage. You're looking at somebody who could really put a pace on Makwan Amirkhani after he gasses out. You're looking at Kyle Nelson, hoping you can get that finish. And then you got Curtis Blaydes, highest ceiling on the slate. You'll notice there's no salary left over. You're not gonna leave salary this week. It's just not gonna happen with the way that the fighters look, how tightly priced this is. I think that favorites dominate largely this week. I don't think that you're gonna be leaving very much on the table. Now, if you didn't like this and you say, oh, I don't play women's MMA or whatever your deal is, and you want to come play Patty Pimblett instead, you have 400 salary left over. You could even go the other way in the main event if you wanted to. Let's say you came down from Victoria Leonardo and you wanted to grab somebody like Paul Craig. Now, I think this is probably something that you see a lot of in your tournament. You might see a lot of people going with the big three here with Molly McCann, Paddy Pimblett, and Tom Aspinall, and just trying to make the rest of it work. I see Ludovit Klein getting a decent amount of love this week. I see Makwan Amirkhani getting a ton of love this week. And then somebody might come back up to somebody like, let's say, Jai Herbert, for example. If they didn't want to go to Jai Herbert and they wanted to come all the way up to Mokaev, there is a way that you can make this work. It would require you to play somebody like Charles Rosa. You would be really punting Charles Rosa at that point. I wouldn't recommend it. Or you can come off of Molly McCann. I could see a lot of people playing Pimblett, Aspinall, Mokaev. At this point, you can afford yourself a little bit more if you were to go with somebody like Jai Herbert, for example, or Marc Diakiese. But now you can come off of these guys and you can make some other things happen in your lineup, like if you wanted to go with Hanna, Goldy, and then follow that up with somebody like Kyle Nelson, you could do that. Another thing that I could see a ton of happening this week is if people just lock in Makwan Amirkhani, lock in Paul Craig, go up here to Tom Aspinall at 8,300, Paddy Pimblett at 8,900. Chris Curtis is going to probably pull a decent amount of ownership just with the name value. And then you'll see somebody play Molly McCann. They might come off of McCann, play somebody like Mason Jones. The late edition of Mason Jones, I think, is going to cause a lot of people to want to get here. If you want to go completely chalk public, this is somebody who made a lineup in 2 minutes on the toilet. You can grab somebody like Makwan Amirkhani, Alexander Gustafsson. They're going to grab Paul Craig, come up here to Tom Aspinall. Now you can make a lot of things happen, right? You can go get Muhammad Mokaev. You can go get Paddy Pimblett. You've left salary on the table. You might see a lot of that. Personally, if you sent me this lineup, I would probably tell you to change some things. I would probably tell you to get off of Gustafsson, get off of Makwan Amirkhani, and then try to do some other things with your lineup. If I were in your shoes and I had this lineup, I'd probably come down here to somebody like Kyle Nelson, who you've heard me say a lot so far. And I might honestly just switch the main event, go with Curtis Blaydes, take out Tom Aspinall, and then I'd come back up here to grab somebody like Jonathan Pearce. But there are a lot of different ways that you can attack it this week. I think that as long as you just spend the salary that you have, don't leave too much left over because the favorites are going to dominate. When you have an event like this, especially with as much pride as they have over there, you're looking at a situation where matchmaking is going to put together favorable matchups for the home team, and that's okay. You can't tell me that Molly McCann and Paddy Pimblett don't have some of the easiest matchups on the slate. As for props that we like this week, I do think that there are a couple that are just very obvious. First is exact method of victory, knockout. If you just take the knockout in the fight between Kyle Nelson and Jai Herbert, I think that makes a ton of sense. Right now it sits at minus 225. If you wanted to parlay that up with something else, if it wasn't juicy enough for you, I get it. But one of these guys is getting knocked out, and you get a much better line on the KO victory prop than you would if you were to just do fight doesn't go the distance. That at the time of recording this is minus 330. A spot that we talked about earlier in the week that I think makes a ton of sense is Marc Diakiese by submission. It's sitting at plus 1,000. With the amount of grappling that Diakiese is going to do this week, I don't see how you can have a prop this ridiculous out there right now. This is almost as ridiculous as plus 800 on a Matt Schnell by submission prop last week that we talked about. This is totally worth taking a shot on. I think he gets a rear naked choke. Paul Craig versus Volkan Oezdemir. Listen, the over 2.5 that sits at plus 180. Sneaky. If you want to go a step further and grab fight goes the distance at plus 240, that's sneaky as well. I think with this fight, it's just so many people are expecting it to be finished that it could just be one of those fights that just doesn't. Nicolas Dalby by decision, currently sitting at plus 150. Come on. Molly McCann by decision sits at minus 165. I think that makes a ton of sense. Paddy Pimblett by knockout at plus 200 I think is a good spot. And then I will give you one more. If we look at the main event, fight goes the distance no, sitting at minus 300 is an absolute no-brainer. If you wanted to parlay that with anything, you could just add that in, just extra fodder for your bets. And to quickly go through the card for you top down, I have Curtis Blaydes by knockout, Chris Curtis by decision, Paddy Pimblett by knockout, Nikita Krylov by decision, Molly McCann by decision, Paul Craig by decision, Mason Jones by decision, Marc Diakiese by submission, Nathaniel Wood by decision, JSP inside the distance, Muhammad Mokaev inside the distance. I like Kyle Nelson by knockout, Victoria Leonardo by decision, Nicolas Dalby by decision. If you have made it to this point in the video, thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. Make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel, comment something for the algorithm. It's time.